You share 70% of your genes with a banana. The difference isn't where you think. It sounds like a joke, but the number is real. About 70% of a banana's genes have a recognizable match somewhere in your own DNA. Yet a banana sits on a kitchen counter and you read this sentence. So the question gets sharper. If we share most of the same genes, what actually makes a human different? The answer isn't more genes. It's the instructions that decide when, where, and how. To understand the banana number, start with what a gene actually does. A gene is a stretch of DNA that codes for a protein. Proteins are the molecular machines that build cells, repair tissue, digest food, fire neurons, copy DNA, and do almost everything else that being alive requires. And the basic machinery of being alive is incredibly old. Every living thing on Earth, banana, mushroom, fruit fly, blue whale, you, descended from a common single-celled ancestor that lived roughly 3.5 billion years ago. That ancestor already had genes for the core jobs, making energy from sugar, copying DNA, building cell membranes, repairing damage, dividing in two. Those genes were so useful that evolution never had a reason to throw them out. So a banana cell still uses essentially the same enzymes you do to break down glucose. It still uses the same kind of DNA repair proteins when its chromosomes get damaged. It still uses the same basic machinery to copy itself before dividing. 70% overlap isn't a coincidence. It's the shared toolkit that every cell on this planet inherited, kept, and never stopped using. Here's the part most people miss. The number of genes in your body is not impressive. Humans have roughly 20,000 protein-coding genes. So do mice. Bananas have around 36,000, almost double. A simple roundworm with about 1,000 cells has 20,000. Rice has more genes than you do. So if gene count doesn't explain the difference between a banana and a person, what does? The answer is regulatory DNA. Only about 1 to 2% of your genome actually codes for proteins. The other 98% is full of switches, dials, and timers that decide when each gene turns on, in which cell, at what strength, and for how long. These are called promoters, enhancers, silencers, and regulatory elements. A liver cell and a brain cell in your body have exactly the same genes, but completely different regulatory programs running on top of them. The same is true between species. A banana and a human share the gene for, say, an energy processing enzyme. But the human regulatory network turns that gene on in a beating heart muscle 10 times per second. The banana regulatory network turns it on in a leaf when sunlight hits it. Same gene, wildly different instructions. That's where the difference actually lives. So how do we know regulatory DNA is the real divergence? Two big pieces of evidence. First, comparative genomics. When scientists line up the human genome against the chimpanzee genome, a species we share around 98 to 99% of our genes with, most of the protein coding sequences are nearly identical. The places where humans and chimps differ most are not in the genes themselves. They're in the regulatory regions that control those genes. Tiny changes in a few enhancers near brain development genes are enough to dramatically reshape how those genes get expressed in the developing cortex. Second, the experimental evidence. In the lab, scientists can take a human regulatory sequence and put it into a mouse embryo. The mouse's own brain genes are essentially identical to the human ones, but driven by the human switch, they get turned on in a different pattern, and the mouse's brain region grows larger and more complex. The gene didn't change. The instruction did. Same toolkit, different programmer. That's the real answer to the banana question. You and a banana share most of the parts. What you don't share is the wiring diagram, the regulatory code that decides when each part fires, in which tissue, and how the whole thing comes together as you, instead of as a piece of fruit. That's why a banana has 70% of your genes, and why that matters less than you'd think. Subscribe to Curious Science for more genetic surprises. Monday, why penguins don't freeze and the countercurrent system in their feet.